Femi Oluwole, thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure to be here.
Um, there's so much I want to ask you. So I want to start with to the people. I'm sure you're well known by many who are listening to this. Um, but if you had to meet someone at a party and they ask, "What is it that you do?" How would you describe your profession, your activities?
I'm the anti-Brexit guy who shouts at, well, then the Tories, now Labour, trying to get them to stop doing right-wing crap.
Fair, pretty succinct. Nice, nice. Um, how did you get involved with this? Tell me about your journey. Tell me about Our Future, Our Choice. What took you from, presumably you didn't start wanting to be an activist from a very young age, or if you did, tell me about your journey from, let's say, high school to here.
Well, during high school, at school, I got told that I could get to Cambridge if I did English Lit. I applied for English Lit and got 5 rejections at UCAS and had to do a gap year. That was fun.
I'm also a gap year enjoyer, so
Nice.
yeah.
I then switched to law with French because I figured that law is hard, but my best skill is arguing. So if I did law, it would arm that skill.
Hmm.
But because it's hard, the best way to make sure I got good grades would be to do law with French because I'm good at French, and that's exactly what happened. I basically used my French skills to steal a law degree, and I had a romantic idea of what being a lawyer was from watching Boston Legal.
Hmm. Hmm.
I would watch people like Alan Shore make these amazing moral speeches and say, "Judge, do this because it's the right thing to do." And then I found out from like September of first year, you can't say, "Judge, do this because it's the right thing to do." You have to say, "Judge, do this because a judge 100 years ago also did this."
Precedent.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so I got kind of disillusioned with the idea of law as as a moral force in and of itself.
Hmm.
And so I moved to, all right, if the rules themselves aren't all moral, how do you change the rules? That's policy.
Right.
And given that I speak French, it made sense to try and affect human rights policy at the European level. And so I started doing internships in Brussels, in Vienna, and ended up working in the EU Fundamental Rights Agency, so the human rights branch of the EU. Uh, and at that
This is
point,
post graduation.
this was yes, graduated in 2013.
Yep.
I was working in Brussels from around 2000, late 2014.
Gotcha.
Um, and when Brexit came along, I started making little videos
Hmm.
online, making Facebook posts. I joined Twitter. Uh,
That's where I went down.
I know, right?
Mistakes were made.
And this is the thing, like I used to say, I'll never get onto Twitter because Facebook already takes over so much of my life. If I ever had Twitter, I would have no life at all, and that's exactly what happened. Um, and
I'm sorry.
yeah, it's a tragedy. And then the election came, the referendum happened. We lost. My feeling was because if Nigel Farage has managed to convince the majority of British voters, my country can never be good again. And so I kept making videos, kept trying to do some stuff.
Oh,
Uh,
can I just pause you there?
mm,
So the morning you woke up to the result,
mm.
where were you? What was that experience like?
I was in I think Premier Inn or something because I was at my brother's graduation, yeah, it was a sad day because I'd tried.
Hmm.
I'd bought a T-shirt from Primark, just a plain white tee. I'd drawn EU questions, just ask on the
Mhm.
front of it, and stood in the center of Birmingham Bullring, just basically trying to get people to have the conversation and try and move the needle because I could see the damage that was coming.
I was going to
Uh,
say because a lot of people underestimated the
oh
vote
yeah,
at the
yeah,
time.
yeah.
Were you like people? We got to wake up. This is actually pretty serious. Like, did you sense the opposition? Or-
I was watching Boris Johnson and his debates with people like David Cameron and Jeremy Corbyn, and he was winning those debates. Like they weren't making the arguments you needed to make,
Hmm.
and so I was not confident at all. Like on a basic level, what is the EU? What's the point of it?
Yeah.
If you had 28 different countries all making their own laws in their own ways, and you had a company that wanted to sell a product in all 28 countries, then you'd have to make that product comply with 28 different sets of rules, which would obviously be so much more expensive to make. And so by all following the same rules, it's the whole point of the EU making laws together, then you can lower your prices, which improves standard of living. That's something quite simple.
Hmm.
That's the single market. It wasn't explained. The
Hmm.
BBC even had a false definition of it up until 2018. And so I could see that we were just being given the wrong information. And then you got to when I was on the street talking to people in the street and the stuff they were coming out with. Whew, I was not confident. There may have been people that thought like, "Oh, everyone's going to vote." I was not confident. Like I had somebody coming up to me and asking, um, will we still be in the Euros if we go leave the EU? Uh,
Important questions, right? Yeah, yeah.
I had one woman who handed me a leaflet. She was like, she must have been like 70, 80 years old. She handed me a leaflet explaining why God was against the EU, which means somebody had been to
That's
the
a strong
trouble.
opposition. Yeah, that's difficult. That's difficult.
Yeah, I know.
You
How
had to
can you
fight
argue?
God. I mean, that's hard. You know.
But it means somebody had gone out of their way to print leaflets in order to manipulate the religion
Religiously. Yeah.
of older people and take advantage of that. So I knew we were up against forces that were just beyond anything. So yeah, that's why I started fighting it, and eventually I started calling up Nigel Farage on his radio show, basically to get him to admit all the lies that he told, and
Mm.
that gave me a public profile until I eventually became this blob that you see before you.
I mean, that's an ungenerous description at the end there. But okay. Around that story, there's the commencement of, or the creation of, Our Future, Our Choice.
Yes.
Is that? Could you talk a little bit about that?
So yeah, round about late 2018, I created this a second Twitter account called Our Future, Our Choice, and it was basically to make the youth argument as to why young people, especially, should not be put through Brexit because we voted heavily against it, and we're the ones most affected by it. And some people connected me with this other group called Our Future Stop Brexit, and there's basically a network of students across the country that didn't want Brexit either. And we joined forces, and because Our Future, Our Choice has the better acronym, we went with OFOC instead. And so when we like led a national campaign, we got on all the media, we were on TV like every week, just basically making the point that it's wrong to do this to young people because the Brexit generation, the Brexit majority has an expiration date.
Yeah. Well, I think I saw one of your TV interviews where you said that even in the years since the vote, the sentiment towards Brexit would have shifted just because of the movement of demographics.
Yeah,
So
if you've got at the time the under 65 population of the UK voted Remain, so that means the people that would actually be of working age at the time of the referendum, even the people who'd actually have to work in the economy created by Brexit didn't want to have to do that. It's objectively opposite of consent.
Yeah. I think pretty much universities that I've seen, sentiments towards Brexit is regretful now. And I think everyone's got a sort of like vague idea of why. People are seeing prices increase. People lament long queues in airports and all that sort of stuff. But as someone who's obviously studied this fervently, if someone were to ask you, how has Brexit damaged the UK? How would you answer that question?
Brexit has the two main things are it has lowered the quality of life, and it has divided society.
Right.
Or rather, it has exacerbated the divisions in society because those divisions were there before.
Yeah.
Especially along a north-south, rich-poor divide. And yes, of course, many working class people did vote Remain, but there was the issue of, and this is the story that I often tell to Londoners who don't understand how anybody could vote Leave. If you are 50 years old, you live in Sunderland, Hull, Redcar, Swansea, and you remember when you were 11, your dad lost his job because Margaret Thatcher closed the shipyards, the mines. You hate the Tories. And so you've always voted Labour because of your hatred of the Tories and what they did to you. But because your part of the country always votes Labour, then both parties know there's no actual political incentive to do anything for that part of the country because the Tories are always going to lose, Labour is always going to win. So why their votes aren't meaningful.
Yeah.
So you've watched your area get nothing. Meanwhile, places like London get more investment and development every year. Canary Wharf, London Eye. There's no underground tube system in Hull. So you've watched politics completely forget about you. You've watched your vote mean nothing your entire life. And then here comes this referendum, and you've been through 6 years of austerity, David Cameron financially strangling you and everybody you can see around you. And he's the guy telling you to vote for things to say the same. Under those circumstances, if you haven't studied EU law, if you don't know the benefits of having frictionless trade with the EU and the reason why it makes sense to quote unquote give up that sovereignty to share lawmaking with other countries, then I would vote Leave. if I hadn't studied EU law, like when I saw that 350 million pound on the bus thing,
Yeah, I mean,
I genuinely was like, wait, hang on, am I on the right side here? And then
it's
I
a
had
compelling. It was a fantastic lie. A
exactly.
fantastic lie.
Exactly. It's like we shouldn't call people stupid for voting leave. It was an objectively sensible thing to consider doing if you know we are poor, the NHS is in trouble, there's money going to the EU, and I haven't had it explained to me why that money is better going there than here.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So in a sense, one of the things it comes down to is obviously the neglect of both parties to some in these
Mm,
areas, but also misinformation.
yes.
Right. In the time since Brexit to now, I don't think the problem of misinformation has gotten any better. Um,
Yeah.
so I'm really curious about this. So I've got a two-parter, I guess, question for you. One, so we're in an age where a lot of the news that people see is sort of like algorithmically driven. People don't see the same Google searches, the
Mm.
same homepage, same TikTok feed, whatever. What advice would you give to someone who wants to maybe break out of that algorithmic bubble? How can people maybe avoid being fed misinformation or being stuck in an echo chamber? What advice would you give to people generally on that, if there is a way out of that?
Honestly, I would genuinely bat the question back to you as the guy who actually has studied computer
Oh,
science.
no, physics. Yeah. Well,
um,
I can give my take, but I'm more interested in yours.
like, my first thought was buy a new phone.
Create a new identity.
Yeah.
This is why I have 7, not because I'm a drug dealer. That's on record. All right, not. It's because of news. That's why. Yeah.
How to break out of the echo chamber? I think it would be try and make sure that when other stuff comes onto your FYP, that if your For You page that doesn't necessarily correspond to stuff that you agree with, stay on it a bit longer. Hear those arguments. So you at least know the other side of whatever you believe.
Mm.
Like I put myself through for at least a year of watching Nigel Farage every night. I need to rephrase that. Watching Nigel Farage's radio show at 7 p.m. every evening, and knowing every single argument that he makes on
Yeah.
Brexit. So that when I then end up calling him, I knew what he was going to say.
Yeah.
Like, it got to the point that I'd called him so many times that I scripted out how the conversation was going to go and posted it on Twitter because I knew that even if it got to him, he wouldn't be able to avoid it because
Yeah.
he only has those arguments.
Yeah.
And so once you know the other side, you know the flaws, and you can actually have this conversation. We have this problem whereby we only listen to our side, and then when we try and have an argument with the other side, they'll say some stuff that we haven't even heard before.
Yeah.
And so we'll lose the fight.
Mm.
I think it's so important to hear what the other side is saying. And if you know what your core values are, you should prioritize those. Like Jordan Peterson, he'll say some stuff that sounds like it's being sensible. I think the most famous example is the stuff that he says about the wage gap. He says that, well, women statistically will choose these professions that might be lower paid. They'll statistically take more likely to take maternity leave than men, and these are choices, and therefore that wage gap is understandable, etc. And that might sound logical, but then you've got to remember, what are my core values? Do I believe that inequality? Do I believe that it's okay for a woman to work just as hard as a man, whether that's in a lower paid profession, whether that's because they're working part-time in the job and part-time looking after children, which is kind of essential to the economy? Do I believe it's okay for women to work just as hard as men, but have significantly less financial power? So when you go into these places, try and look at the end result of whatever their ideology leads to. Are they saying stuff that sounds like it's sensible, but in the end, what you're left with is something that is deeply unfair and it goes against what you believe in.
So I guess in that, I'm not familiar with his explanation, but it sounds like the difference between explaining what's currently happening versus a sort of normative judgment of like, that's fine. Because I think in the one hand, you might, like, for climate change, you could say the reason why the climate is warming is because we're all driving cars and using fossil fuels. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's okay.
Yes.
It's like, this is the mechanism that's currently occurring.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so I guess following on from that, you said recently in a video, and I think this is a complete quote. You said, "No one who is successful in politics is an idiot. They often know what's right, what's wrong, what's true, what's false. They choose when to be right, to further their agenda. And I believe you were talking about Richard Tice in
Mm.
that context. Um, do you believe that the people, whether it's in the context of Brexit or the Tories, your political opposition, do you believe that they themselves often believe their own rhetoric? Like when they advocate for, say, economic policy or Brexit, they genuinely thought like this is the right move for the UK, or do you think some of these arguments are made purely for means of advancing their own political career?
So there is a political spectrum, and like there are people on the left as I am, and then there are Tories. And I worked with a lot of Tories during the Brexit years because Brexit was a dividing line between people on either side of the spectrum who were happy to people who were happy to see their country objectively damaged and people who weren't.
Yeah,
Um, because it was very, very obvious to everybody who worked in politics full time that Brexit would damage the country,
right.
and they were on record as saying that.
Hmm.
Like if you look at Boris Johnson in 2000,
Because yeah, but way before the vote was happening, he was pro EU, wasn't he?
yes,
Yeah.
in 2011, he said that Britain is a fully paid up member of the single market, and under no circumstance, in my view, would a British Prime Minister ever change that position.
Mhm.
In 2013, he said, I vote to the single market. I'm in favor of the single market. I think we should be able to trade freely with our European friends and partners. So he knew Brexit would damage the country.
Yeah.
But he chose to ride that wave of nationalism into number 10. And especially is because I think we often forget politicians like to have this attitude of we know everything, we know every policy, we know how to, we're experts in every area, but they're not. Most of them might have studied PPE at Oxford, politics, philosophy, and economics, but they won't be proper experts. They're having to go on what their experts tell them. And if they know that their civil service is telling them that no matter what version of Brexit they negotiate, it will make everybody poorer, and they still go for it, it's not just that they're ignoring experts. They know they have no reason to believe that they know better than the experts because they know that they haven't done the studying, done the work that those experts have done. They know that they are wrong.
Yeah.
Um,
It's gross negligence, if anything else, right?
yeah.
Like, yeah.
So they it can only be they've chosen to prioritize their political careers over the poverty and welfare of millions of people.
Mm.
So I do genuinely see a significant part of our elected body as objectively just evil.
Yeah, opportunistic.
Yeah.
All that, yeah. Do you think Nigel Farage believes anything he says, or
Um, I think he just doesn't care. I think it's important to make a distinction between people that are um, knowingly lying and people that just don't care. Like he's on record as saying, when I'm asked, will we richer or poorer with Brexit? You know what I tell them? What price freedom? What price liberty? What price our identity as a country? So he's on record as saying that it doesn't matter what price we pay economically because he believes that the principles of Brexit are more important. So that's he just doesn't care.
yeah, the most generous interpretation of that is it's an ideological difference, and then perhaps
Mm.
less generously, it's he doesn't care. Yeah,
Yeah, but I mean, if you are a millionaire,
yeah. No, I'm
like,
not disagreeing. To
yeah,
be clear, right? Yeah, yeah,
and you know that like millions of people are in poverty,
yeah.
um,
But you're like, we need more freedom.
yeah, we
Not,
can afford
not,
freedom.
not. You know what the solution to poverty is? More freedom.
Exactly,
Yeah.
because people often say that it's more important. Brexit was about more than money, etc. It's easy for you to say
Well, they
that.
made that about it, right? It was a sort of a sense of like our borders and all that
Yeah,
sort
yeah.
of taking back Britain and Britain being British or whatever.
But that
Fabulous.
narrative, it never came from the working class people that
Mm,
they claim to represent.
yeah.
Those people just needed things to get better after years of austerity. It's the thing from Friends where Ross says to Rachel, I just didn't think that money was such an issue. Yeah, that's because you have it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess on that, um, cynically, then those two groups of people, where there's the ones who are just and they'll change their values that they espouse based on whatever they think will advance their political career, and then maybe we have people who have values, but they're bad values
Mm.
or values which don't necessarily like further the betterment of the populace. What informs your values? What would you say your values are?
Ooh.
What informs your rhetoric?
Uh, so I think watching lots and lots of superhero shows as a kid, an idea of needing to do good,
Mhm.
coupled with childhood trauma. um,
That's well, I mean, that's a superhero story, right? Yeah.
exactly. You've got to you've got to face that abuse. Um, uh,
This is not clinical advice. This is not a medical advice. Neither of us are doctors, registered or otherwise. This is pure anecdotal.
I don't know, a friend that was complaining about the fact that they always use this whole severe trauma is the only reason anyone does good thing that's just within all of superhero
Oh yeah,
lore.
fiction. A lot of fiction writing. Yeah, the old terrible thing happened, and then that steals them to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in my case, yes.
Yeah, hey, well, sometimes classic story structures are there for a reason. Just to,
Exactly, exactly. So I think you've heard me quote this, a quote from Angel, nothing in the world is the way it ought to be. It's harsh and cruel,
Mhm.
but that's why there's us. Doesn't matter where we come from, what we've done or suffered, or even if we make a difference, you live as though the world were as it should be to show what it can be. A shorter version of that, which is in the same show, the Buffy spin-off, uh, is if nothing we do matters, then all that matters is what we do.
Mm.
It doesn't matter how crappy the government is being, or whether or not you can see any light at the end of the tunnel in the near future. If you don't do good, if you don't try and make things better, then that's all it's going to be.
Mhm.
And there will be nobody trying to make things better,
Mm.
which makes things worse.
Yeah, yeah. No, the absence of improvement causes the worse situations to perpetuate.
Mm.
So aside from then, so going a little bit deeper into that, clearly that sort of drives you in political activism. I suppose you have to have that like strong moral core.
Mm.
Um, Specifically, what is defined as good? So obviously, opposing Brexit, I've seen your commentary on other things. You're very critical of economic policy, which widens the wealth gap and everything else. Whether particular thinkers or politicians, in terms of obviously what good is different for different people. So
Mm.
how did you learn what good is for you in a political context?
Uh,
Or are you just like it's common sense? We should not have equality issues.
so like I did have quite a privileged upbringing, but I was acutely aware of my privilege, and I knew that I did not deserve what I was getting more than somebody I would meet in the street.
Mm,
Um, and so the more I learned about the suffering that exists in the world, my original strategy was via human rights. That's where I
mm.
know there's suffering that can be
Yeah.
solved. I can do some good there. And I was one of these people I had an attitude that is partly responsible for Brexit. I thought that politicians had the poverty thing covered. Um, that
Thought
they,
they had that down.
uh,
Top of the agenda.
yeah, and so I thought I could focus my skills on where, like, my background is human rights, it's law, it's French, so I should be, um,
France, famously the capital of human rights issues. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
Strasbourg.
yeah. I've been to Paris.
Oh yeah, um, and I was working in Brussels and Vienna, working in the human rights
Mm,
bodies at that level, and so I thought that's where I should be, and I didn't realize the extent to which poverty was simply not being addressed. And the more I learned about what drove Brexit, the more I went to those voting parts of the country, spoke to people who had been at the real sharp end of austerity,
mhm.
and seeing what they were already going through, knowing that Brexit was this train that was coming down the road that would have smashed them to pieces even further. Um, you asked me where I learned what was right and wrong, who's on the right side of history. Any politician that was happy to tolerate that, I simply just thought, oh, you're not in this for the right reasons.
Yeah,
Because you know that the experts are saying this will damage people's lives. You know that every medical body in the country is saying this will damage the
yeah,
NHS. So, and you know we're already in an NHS crisis, we're already in the poverty crisis. If you were on the wrong side of Brexit, I simply can't trust you.
yeah. That's the sort of
Mm,
watershed moment,
yeah.
or at least if you're on the wrong side of, if you were in that room on the
Mm,
wrong side of Brexit,
yes.
as we said, we're sympathetic to those who
Yes,
were misinformed. Yeah,
voters is very, very different
yeah,
because
yeah.
if it's not your day, it's not your day job. It's not you're not working full time. But if you are in this full time,
Then, dude,
yeah,
you made the wrong call in a very serious way.
mm,
Do you think we'll rejoin the EU at some point?
I think it's inevitable. Because a couple of just unavoidable facts. the people of the UK will always want a better quality of life, and undoing Brexit will always be a way to achieve that.
Mm.
So we can only go through so many elections where until eventually
A
the
politician says, I'm going to try and make this a priority because,
yeah.
yeah.
And right now you've got Keir Starmer like literally today saying, sorry, you're not going to put this out today.
This is being recorded on. I'll probably put like a this is recorded on just also for context.
Okay.
So if some major news story breaks in the next few days, and they're like, why didn't they talk about that? It's really interesting. I will put a big like, yeah. So anyone who's listening who didn't listen to the intro, it's the 27th of August at about 20 past 3. So if something happens at 5 p.m. today,
Yeah.
so sorry, go ahead.
So Keir Starmer said
Yeah.
that growth is his top priority, and that's how you grow our way out of the problems. You can get more tax revenue, which means that you can then spend more in helping people, etc. But Brexit is taking 4% off our economy. So anybody that's serious about growing the economy in order to solve these problems has to undo Brexit.
Yes.
So yeah, it's an inevitability. It's just about, especially given that the majority of the country supports rejoining the EU, thinks Brexit is a mistake, knows Brexit is making us poorer. It's simply not logical for us to not significantly reverse it in the coming years.
So to that end, and obviously it seems like public sentiment has shifted, perhaps inevitably, and probably more than that, on Brexit. Uh, Being in the political activism space and being and making content on TikTok, tweeting, all that sort of stuff. What forms of activism do you think, at least online, are most effective? And which have you found are least effective in your years of doing this?
Um,
And is that hard to gauge?
so it's definitely changed over time, especially with the advent of Mr. Musk. It's made Twitter a slightly less useful, effective tool,
Mhm.
given the levels of hate that he's unleashed on there. Many people who are progressively minded are finding that place simply too toxic to even use anymore.
Yeah.
However, it does still have the benefit of it's where all the politicians are.
Yeah.
They're not really on TikTok. They're not on Instagram, or at least not in any way that's
Not on
meaningful.
threads.
Not really either.
Yeah.
So if you want to call out a politician, Twitter is the place to be,
Mhm.
which is why I feel I have to be there. However, given the way Twitter is going, given that we all need to be aware, Gen Z, millennials, they are the people that are about to become the main electorate, the main consumer base for all the big corporations, etc. If those are the people you want to reach and actually speak to the future and actually create that swell of this is what the people want, voters, politicians do this if you want to keep your power, then TikTok and Instagram are the places to be.
Yeah,
Mm.
I think I see this certainly as the Kamala Harris campaign accelerates more and more Democrats joining
Mm.
TikTok and announcing that, and
Yes, yeah,
that seems to have been key to their campaign over there.
yes.
Um,
She is brat.
she is Brat. Yes, that's on record. It'll be interesting to see if that happens more and more in the UK. I do think that again, the whole difference between US and UK politics, but they are a little bit more slick over there with their
Mm.
usage, or at least they're becoming more slick with the use of social media platforms.
That said, Nigel Farage and to some extent Andrew Tate as well, they worry me because Nigel Farage knows the TikTok game. He's on TikTok. He's got lots and lots of followers, and he is targeting 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, etc., 16-year-olds, because he knows that millennials and Gen Z know exactly who he is, exactly what he's done, and they have no time for that kind of ideology. But 13-year-olds at school, they did not grow up with Nigel Farage. They weren't here when he was really mask off. He's got more mask off these days, but still, people like Katie Hopkins are taking advantage of that demographic and ingratiating themselves. Just these regular guys saying what needs to be said, kind of thing. And it's why Andrew Tate is also aiming for that demographic as well. So I am worried that not enough of us on this side of politics are taking that threat seriously.
Yeah, I do think seeing I've said this before, I think, even on this podcast, but Andrew Tate in particular, I think, held up a really good mirror to the mockery of like how algorithms work because you had all these people reposting clips of him just saying the most outrageous things,
Mm.
and knowing that algorithms are fueled by outrage and that you'll be shown something either you viscerally disagree with or viscerally agree with,
Mm.
and alt-right pipelines. um it's heartbreaking that these systems can be hijacked so effectively,
Yep.
and that young impressionable people can be influenced that way. How do you think we counteract that? How do you is the way to counteract the Nigel Farage type media just to have more savvy people on the left doing the same. Uh,
I think with Nigel Farage, I mean, that's how I made a name for myself.
mm,
It's by exposing the lies of what he said, and
mm,
it's very, very easy to do if you just do it consistently. Like I've got him dead to rights on pretty much every narrative he's ever said.
mhm,
Like the stuff about immigration, I got him to admit that his entire rhetoric around immigration was based on a lie.
yeah.
So that's easier because he's more of a most of his stuff, like we have the advantage in the UK, which that we've already seen the far right's agenda play out. Unlike in other places in Europe, even in America, where they haven't really seen what their agenda would do. We've had Brexit. We've had people like Nigel Farage say we haven't benefited economically from Brexit, so he's quite easy to expose. Andrew Tate is harder. Andrew Tate is speaking to 13-year-old boys in a way that is so effective because Andrew Tate represents what most 13-year-old boys would like to one day become. He's got lots of women, lots of cars, lots of money. He's famous. He's really fit. And so he's speaking to them direct. He's speaking directly to their needs. And I think one of the failures of the left, the young left especially, is that we haven't really got that many answers to that. Any people that are speaking about how to be successful, but in a way that is decent and progressive, or
Mhm.
any ways to speaking about romance, speaking about their exploits with women, that sort of thing, but in a way that isn't a. Can I say dick?
You can say whatever you want, dude. You can say whatever you want. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Do you think there's? I sometimes think there's some with the issue of politics, whereby someone who's truly wise wouldn't put themselves forward as a good example because they are, very aware of their faults and foibles.
Mm.
And so I think it takes a certain kind of person to be like, you know what, I am the masculine ideal, and like the type of person who says that probably like maybe inherently disqualifies themselves a little bit. Again,
Yeah.
I do agree that like the bar with Andrew Tate is super low.
Mm.
Like I think we were talking before this, where I'd say I'd take Mr. Bean as like the
Mm.
the new masculine ideal over that. But yeah, no, I sometimes think about this too in terms of like I think this was a couple of years ago, but I think ContraPoints made a video where she said something, and this may be entirely misquoting, but something to the effect of she kind of gets some of the sympathy that Jordan Peterson gets, because on the left, oftentimes we go, yeah, so capitalism produces all these inequalities, and yeah, good luck with that. Whereas at least on the right, and to people like Andrew Tate or Jordan Peterson, they say, yeah, like life as a bloke is hard, but there's something you can do about it, and there's like a sort of like, here's the next step,
Mm.
and there's a sort of, you can make yourself better, and this is hero narrative. Whereas on the left, maybe it's less sexy to go, we need to deconstruct and rebuild society. Probably won't happen in your lifetime, kid, but and you are part of the problem by existing. So yeah, but also do it.
Mm. That is, I think that's why we do need to be a lot more radical. I mean, one of the benefits of Gen Z, I believe, that they are less willing to take the crap of the boomer generation and what they've done. That
It's
they do
fantastic.
actually
Yeah, yeah,
want
yeah,
immediate change.
yeah.
And one of the biggest blocks to progress is the belief that progress isn't possible in the short term.
Yeah, and one of the requirements of progress is often the belief that it can be done. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Like when you look at things like the two biggest issues that I talk about these days are voter reform, so that everybody's votes counts equally,
hmm,
and undoing the damage of Brexit. Both of those issues require the belief that we can solve these problems, because they can be solved the next one day to the next. Keir Starmer could go on TV today and say we are planning to rejoin fully the EU single market in order to get rid of all the trade barriers that are making your food more expensive. He could say today we are going to have a voting system where everybody's vote counts equally. He could do that
yeah,
today.
yeah,
But there are so many people saying, "Oh, but it's going to take time. You've got to work through these things. It's unrealistic to think that he can do this in a single parliament." No, it can be done. He's
yeah,
simply choosing not to.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The sort of like faff of just sort of saying, "Oh, it's difficult."
Yeah,
To, yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I agree with you. One of the things that genuinely worries me most about the future, as AI and all these innovations happen, and the rate of technological progress, is I often feel like our governments, we're running on essentially like an old operating system. And the annoying part of this whole analogy is using a computer analogy with computers, but whatever. Which is just like the rate of which we can legislate
Mm.
and react to innovations is just slower than the rate of innovation itself. And if the rate of
Mm.
innovation continues to accelerate, it's like, dude, we need a fucking system upgrade here, like pronto. But some of that may just be the way in which we use it, right? As you
Mm.
say, of just like politicians being maybe a little bit more gun ho and like all these like imaginary barriers of like, oh, this takes time. It's like, no, it doesn't.
Mm.
We can talk about this in the Commons today.
Yes,
So
exactly.
yeah, no, I would agree with you there. Uh, so following on from all of that, obviously we talked about Farage, and you've got lots of content criticizing various people on the right and reform. Bearing in mind the date this is being recorded and that this is subject to change, are there any British politicians you think are good at their job, who you respect or admire?
Um, my usual go-to.
Subject to change. Again,
Yeah, I know.
cannot emphasize this enough.
I know. It's always such a difficult thing to say I like this politician because the next day they could say some
Yeah,
horrendous
just the
crap.
tweet. Fuck.
Yeah.
God damn it.
Like my usual go-tos are Clive Lewis and Caroline Lucas, on the basis that Caroline Lucas has always been on the right side of the issues that I've seen whilst we've been whilst I've been involved in politics,
Mhm.
both in terms of she's the biggest force in parliament and dealing with climate change as the head of the Green Party, or at least she was, and she was on the right page on Brexit. You could make the counter argument that as the Green Party, it's very easy to do the right thing because the political pressures aren't there because you're simply a one-person party at the time, but at the same time, she was still the person doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Clive Lewis, because right now he's the biggest voice for getting us a fair voting system, and given that in every election since World War II, except for 3 elections, the majority of votes have gone to parties to the left, the Conservatives. If we had equal voting in this country, we would never see a Conservative majority, almost ever.
What voting system do you advocate for?
It has to be some form of proportional representation. So that could either be something between you simply add up the number of votes across the country, and whatever percentage each party gets corresponds to the number of seats they get in Parliament, or you could do it regionally. So let's say in Birmingham there are 20 MP seats. If 40% vote for Greens, then they'll get 8 MPs. That kind of thing.
Mhm.
So it splits up regionally. So at least you have that some sense of a local connection, but it still means that you don't have a situation where if in your town 30% vote Green, 30% vote Labour, but 40% vote Tory, you'll get a Tory MP, even though 60% has voted for left-leaning parties.
Mm.
So you by having things more proportional, it's more representative of what people actually want. So something along those lines.
Yeah, I one of the really annoying moments for me when I was in school was the AV referendum, the alternative vote
Mm.
referendum, which at least seemed to my mind to be such a clear improvement.
Yes.
And yet politicians on both sides
Made it look like too complicated.
yeah, which is just preposterous.
Yeah. So it's not.
I know you're suggesting something different, but I'm basically
Yeah. No. But it's definitely like you've.
step in the right direction.
Yeah, it's a step in the right direction because it means you don't have a situation where you end up with a party that most people would not want in government under any circumstances.
Completely agree, and as if we don't, at least like a big part of like pop culture and media now is not like top 10 lists. The idea that you can do like a top 4
I
ranking,
know.
it's like this is all people do. What are your top 3 movies? Who are your top 5 favorite?
It's
whatever.
most of the TikTok filters.
Yeah. Like well, if anything, we've been training the populace for AV.
Exactly.
Like that's the real Chinese psyop. It's just good, like getting everyone ready for AV. Okay, so you make content across YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. How do and I'm curious about this just also on a personal level. How do comment sections differ and your interactions differ on each platform? Because I've sometimes posted the same video. One that comes to mind, I did a video that was critical of some of Jordan Peterson's rhetoric on climate change, and on TikTok, everyone's like, "Yep, couldn't agree more. Climate change is super real." Put it on YouTube. That was the most disliked video I've ever put out. So I'm curious as to, given that you speak about much more contentious issues than I do on a much more regular basis. Yeah.
So if we're talking about how bad and just outrageously,
Yeah, let's go worst first.
Yeah.
Sure.
At the bottom, I would have used to say YouTube, because that's some unhinged crap. But ever since Musk has taken over, nope, no, Twitter is Oh my god.
Yeah, yeah, that's the
It's
yeah.
every single day. Like the stuff that I've had, I'll get stuff like saying, go back to Africa. Africa is the most common thing that's said once a day now. At least that I see. I'll be called the N word on a regular basis. Probably now approaching once a day.
Oh,
Threats of violence are probably once every at least twice a week now, I'd say.
sweet.
Uh,
Are these from accounts that are like with a car as their profile picture, or are they like people who it's like you can tell their names,
uh,
or what's the?
I think the murder ones tend not to have verified pictures, but they will have uh either a car or a face. Depends on. But I am getting full on racist crap from verified accounts now.
It's wild.
Like, it's what it's the thing that I hate the most about what he did. Elon Musk, is that he made legitimacy. He put a dollar amount on legitimacy. Anybody can buy it. Like, I'm not here sat as some moaning, oh, I had a blue ticket, used to mean something. No, but it damages the conversation
Mhm.
if somebody can be seen as a legitimate force whilst promoting hateful death threats.
Well, I mean, beyond, I mean, firstly, yeah, that's atrocious, and also it strikes me that the negatives that should come along with that system, because if you had that, and everyone was, let's say, their certification was due to their like driver's license and address being known,
Mm.
presumably you could report them, and you can
Yes.
be like, this is like hate speech, but you've got all of the downsides and all the upsides
Yeah.
of that sort of
Yeah,
system.
there's no point reporting because it's all false. I even have this fear in my head that I'll one day like put this person on blast. I'll post I'll find their name, correspond it to a Facebook account, find out where they work, post it, but the person will just use the fake name, and I've just got somebody in trouble for no reason.
Yeah,
I worst case scenario, you've got to think about it
yeah,
at
yeah,
all
yeah.
times. And so there's not really much you can do until they start to actually tie accounts to social security numbers, national insurance number, whatever,
Yeah.
to actually make it, and it has to be decentralized so that the government can't use it for authoritarian reasons. It's a whole
Yeah.
conversation. Um, but something has to be done because Elon Musk has essentially ruined the biggest social town square of the planet by just filling it with right wing crap. So yes, Twitter's at the bottom.
That seems pretty conclusive. Given what you told me.
Then YouTube, then probably Facebook, and then TikTok is next, and then Instagram above there. Primarily, because, well, this is my experience.
Yeah, no, no.
Um, my I think it's exactly the reverse. My TikTok followers is 56% male. My Instagram followers 56% female.
Okay.
So my comments on Instagram tend to be much, much more supportive because men skew slightly more right than women.
Damn.
Mm.
Damn. Does that inform the kinds of content or the way you approach posting on each platform, or do you put the same stuff across each?
I do, because of that gender split, I will, in my head, at least to some extent, know I'm speaking to a slightly more male audience when I'm on TikTok.
Yeah.
Like there'll be stuff that I'll say on TikTok that doesn't need to be said on Instagram
Mhm.
because the women already know it. So there's a slight element of that because it's only 56% that
No,
way.
no, I'm just
Yeah,
curious
yeah.
because, like, sometimes I think it's interesting to me where I'll see someone who, just another content creator, doesn't even need to be political, but they'll be absolutely killing it on one platform and seemingly not getting any of the engagement on the other. And maybe that's just down to luck, but also it strikes me that there's a certain type of post or context to Instagram which just doesn't seem to resonate on TikTok. And I was wondering if that extended out to.
Yeah, there are definitely some posts that will do significantly better on one platform or the other. I think domestic violence is something that gets severely suppressed on TikTok, less so than on Instagram. Instagram will talk about it. I think that's probably because they know their audience is more female.
Mhm.
But I'll do the same post about domestic violence on TikTok and it'll go nowhere.
Mm.
But it'll do numbers on Instagram, which is unfortunate. Like I recently did a video on misogyny being classed as a form of
Yeah, I was about to
extremism,
say, yeah.
and I looked at the metrics on that. It was really goddamn disappointing
Mm.
because, like I said, my TikTok followers are 56% male, but when you look at the numbers of who saw that video, 20% male. that's a video that I wanted to go out to men
Yeah.
to understand the problem, and because women maybe women engage with it more. I don't know, but
Yeah, no, but it's deeply frustrating, isn't it? Well,
yeah.
that comes back to that echo chamber we were talking about earlier. It's
Mm,
just really hard to
mm,
fight that, isn't it? Unless people actively seek to get
mm,
out of it.
yeah.
So no, that's really interesting. I yeah, again, my the narrow sort of political esque, but like explicitly political posts which I've made, which are like I'm being me. I'm not trying to play a bunch of different characters.
Mm.
Yeah, it's been massively skewed differently between YouTube and TikTok, but I don't post on Twitter at all, and just like have never done that. So
This is better for your mental health.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, but as you say, well, as I think we were talking about earlier, maybe it's a prudent time to mention this. Um, y- you and you said before this conversation started that obviously you receive a lot of racist attacks, and activism on its own in any context is a very difficult um, thing to undertake for change. Uh, how do you tolerate the pain? Like what gets through? Because it sounds like it must be extremely difficult. So
Mm,
my share of internet negativity, I think
mm,
I've lucked out in that I'm a white straight man, so I don't really receive. I've won the privilege card in that
mm.
respect.
Yeah.
But like I have like science educators, educational content creators who are female, and they'll be wearing like nothing sexual at all, just be their face, and they'll be sexualized, and they'll be speaking about like galaxies, and they'll be find that really deeply frustrating.
Yeah.
Um, and so for you, obviously doing content which to a racist like or to making content which if a racist demographic sees it who are already incensed are going to be doubly
Yep.
incensed. Yeah, how do you deal with that that
Uh,
level of vitriol?
so it's a couple of things. One, it's the uh, I'm aware that as a black man in politics, if there is ever a 5 second clip or a tweet where I'm losing my crap, and I'm getting angry and visibly angry, then my career's over. So that option to get angry is simply taken out of my brain, and I can't approach it. Which is the irony that if I was to get angry in response to stuff like people sending death threats, being racist abuse, which would be the normal human reaction,
Yeah, I think yeah.
I would be treated as subhuman because that's how racists view black people. And it's the irony that in order to be treated as human, I have to turn off my humanity.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. And there's also the like as far as how I keep going, it's the knowledge that whether those people online, the trolls, are real people or not, it still represents an agenda that has for at least the last 14 years or so been winning. And if we don't push back against that, then that's what will define power and the shape of our society until something changes. So the phrase that I often use is giving up is harder.
Fair.
Mm.
Fair. Hang on, I had a follow up on that, which is just immediately escaped my mind. Apologies, my terrible interviewer. Oh yes, so it mentions you taking out, unplugging the anger. Is that part of your prep, or indeed your sort of advantage in your TV appearances? Because I've seen you many times, and I've seen there are other interviewers, like I've seen lots of clips of Jon Stewart where he's interviewing someone who he clearly viscerally disagrees with, and he's shaking, his hands are trembling with anger.
Mm.
Um, do you think, yeah, do you have to like lean on that ability to sort of like essentially detach to the maximal degree in those sorts of appearances?
So yeah, I mean, it's again the benefit of childhood trauma. It's a superpower. Um,
This is not medical advice. Once again, we would like to mention this is not medical advice. Childhood trauma may or may not give you superpowers. Consult your local physician.
because that core anger issue is there. My response to that was over emotional regulation. So
Yeah,
I I very much learned to channel my anger and to focus it primarily at Tories. But the way that I express that is by destroying their arguments. And so it's almost it gives me a release almost the way that like punching a wall would, to know that I've ruined their argument.
logical takedowns. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
And so if somebody starts throwing abuse at me on TV or whatever, if I can just weed through the abuse, find their argument, and then just rip it apart, that's me letting loose.
Do you think this is something I think about often, and I'm not sure whether it's true in this day and age? There's this idea of criticism and winning out in arguments, which is that sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Hmm.
And uh, I think one would hope that, and I think that this, to an extent, I worry this has been disproven that um, if you would see a politician espousing hateful rhetoric, then the disadvantage of like deplatforming those people is that they just literally they still like carry that message, they don't change, and maybe they go and find other sort of like smaller communities to spread that hateful message. But if they're platformed, not like actively, not like we found a racist, let's give them a
Hmm.
platform, but like, if we let these people, take mask off, as it
Hmm.
were, people will go, "Oh, this person's hateful. I'm not going to support them." Do you think there's any credence to that idea, or like, because
So
sometimes I struggle with it.
eh, so these people, the modern day racists, they know not to just come out and say I'm a racist.
Yeah,
They have to couch it in terms that seem more palatable. They'll couch it behind terms like
I was going to say
immigration,
immigration, something
culture,
like that. Yeah,
whatever,
yeah,
or just we've got to address policing issues, and so if you simply just platform them and let them say their thing, they'll just convince more people. They'll normalize those kind of attitudes. And so if you're going to do it, you have to couple it by platforming people that can take them down.
yeah,
And it's why the BBC often fails. They'll platform the worst people, but they won't make sure that they platform somebody that can actually say anything. Like, and their presenters won't, because they have to be balanced. Whatever, even we can get, that's a whole
yeah,
conversation.
yeah.
Um, but if you have to provide the antidote if you're going to give the disease, but they don't. I had something else I was going to
Yeah,
say,
well, no, I
but
got to follow up, which is okay. So there's two different ways I want to take that. I want to ask about the BBC balance thing in a moment,
mm,
but to someone listening who perhaps um, encounters, whether in daily life, in their family life, or what have you, someone who, let's say, has like viscerally different politics to them, who potentially is even like hateful. Aside from the going back in time and getting childhood trauma advice,
mm.
how would you suggest one engages that way? Because you engage in a extremely polite, very logical, very direct way. Is there any advice you give to someone to like to cultivate that skill,
Um,
or is it just getting reps in?
yeah. I'd say ask questions. Your best approach is to simply, if you are 100% sure that their ideology, that what they're saying is wrong, if you figure out why what they're saying is wrong, let them expose the flaws in their own argument. That you probably call the
I see. Yeah.
Socratic method. Uh, and it'll help you
Hmm.
not lose your crap, because if you come at them on attack, you'll be saying things and they'll just keep bashing it away and ignoring your point. But if you literally say, ask them a question, and you just simply no, answer the question, and then they're having to give an attack, and you won't move on until they've answered your question, and you can avoid getting angry yourself. And that'll be a much better way to get to the flaw in their argument.
I guess it's also the appearance of being constructive, of like, no, I'm really trying to understand your viewpoint.
Exactly.
Please explain this to me, because I really don't understand. Like, you said this, and this other thing I've heard. So I mean, please, if you could, I don't know what's going on. Like,
Exactly.
so.
And that's the beautiful thing about it. Like, my favorite moments have been where I've asked a question and the person on the Faraji side of things has just walked it themselves into the point where they have nothing left.
Mhm.
Like, I think I've got one where I was like, this guy was rampantly against immigration,
Mhm.
and he was like, well, they're coming here and they're a burden, etc. It's like, wouldn't it be cool if there was like a system that meant that you could only come to another EU country if you had your own job or sufficient resources to not become a burden on the social assistance system of the host country? Wouldn't that be good? It's like, yeah, that does sound good. That's literally EU law, dude.
Got him. We got him, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, no, that's pretty spectacular. I guess also part of that prep has to be, yeah, like a lot of reading and then
Yes.
engaging with that sort of stuff. And yeah,
And
yeah,
that's the thing that's the thing I say. You have to know your craft.
yeah,
That's why, like, I spend all that time watching Nigel Farage's shows, understanding what all the counter arguments are, and obviously because I studied EU law,
yeah.
I
So
have that advantage.
you've definitely done the reading on that. Um, aside from rejoining the EU,
Mm.
what are other changes, big changes, or perhaps small changes you'd like to see happen in British politics? What would be
So,
the wish list?
so top of the list is electoral reform. So that because if you have a situation where a party with only a minority of the vote always becomes the party of government, which right now our current governing party has 34% of the vote, then that means that the votes that went to the other parties, they have no influence on UK policy because a minority party can simply overrule them. So if the majority of British votes don't count, that's horrendous for democracy. Not to mention, minority groups tend to vote for the more progressive parties, which statistically have tended to have a lower vote share, not been in power, which means that under our current system, the votes of minorities count less. So you deal with equality issues in that. The next thing I say is a big thing is obviously Brexit, but obviously I want to severely I want to get rid of hiring discrimination as much as possible because Oxford University sent out 3,200 job applications to various sectors of the UK economy, and the only thing they changed was the name based on the perceived ethnicity of that name. And they found that the Asian sounding names had to send 70% more applications to get a call back. Nigerian was 80% more applications. Middle Eastern was 90% more applications. So it's 70 to 90% harder to get a job, get that call back, which could potentially be your way out of poverty if
Just
you
on your name.
just based on your name. And I'm 100% sure class, as in which school did you go to, what area you grew up in, will play a factor in that. Your gender, that sort of stuff. If you made job applications anonymous, you severely take an axe to inequality on grounds of race, gender, ethnicity, class, etc. And that would be huge, not just in terms of getting that foot in the door, but also because if you get more people from those disadvantaged backgrounds in those roles, that then improves the perception of people from those backgrounds. Once you start to see more women, more black people, more people from all different backgrounds in those high-flying roles, oh, that becomes like America having a conversation about what's a black job. You change the definition of what jobs belong to what people.
Yeah.
So I want that because that will severely improve things. It also kind of unites unites the different struggles because often the right will try and pit ethnic minorities against working class people as if ethnic minority people aren't statistically likely to be working class. Um, um, and if you show that if you as a policy that unites both, because if you deal with that if you anonymize CV applications, then that benefits working class people and people from other backgrounds as well.
Legit.
Mm.
Cool. Maybe an obvious question, but for a lot of people, their engagement in politics happens only when elections are out or referendums are happening. In what ways would you like more people to get involved with politics?
Uh, so I want people to be more active in talking about politics on social media, and also linking um the values that they have and that they discuss on social media to capital P politics. That means to actual politicians, because often people have this perception of young people, Gen Z especially, that they're not engaged in politics. But everything that I see Gen Z talking about on TikTok is deeply
They're
political.
incredibly left wing.
Yeah,
I try and explain this to people who are on TikTok.
yeah,
I'm like Gen Z is radical, dude.
yeah,
Like the kids are all right. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, the point that I often say is like, millennials were, when I say to dot boomers, like millennials were your last chance as boomers to come quietly, because because Gen Z will not stand for this. They
Then
will burn.
you raise the prizes, and like now we're all renting together, dude. And yeah,
Yeah, like so Gen Z is incredibly political, but we need them voting in enough numbers, and we need them calling out specific politicians that go beyond just your headline politicians. I want them to be at the members of the cabinet really making the points about the issues that they care about, because I think the issue is that politicians aren't scared of young people because they don't expect them to vote.
and they don't expect them to engage. I guess like because I think most of my friends probably have never, if they tweeted a politician, or if they
Mm,
have, it's been maybe in jest. But so
yeah,
you want it to be normalized that people engage that way or comment or whatever,
yeah.
and they go, oh, actually, I am accountable and answerable to everyone.
I want people to feel the force of Gen Z not being happy
Mm,
with them. And I think this is where I'm going to get quite radical. People have often asked me like, um, do you believe in working within the system or outside of the system? And I think you can only work within the system to the extent that the system will allow you to achieve change.
yeah.
If the system doesn't want you to isn't compatible with change, you have to go outside the system.
Mm,
So if we're looking at a political system where the majority of votes don't count because of our voting system, because we have a two-party system where essentially a handful of people get to choose our prime minister because those are the only choices we get, um, and obviously Labour is the party that's most likely to want to give us a fair voting system.
mm,
They're our only chance.
yeah.
So if they don't give it to us, the system does not allow the change that we need to allow all votes to count equally. And so, in my view, we have to, if Labour doesn't do the right thing within the next year or so, get pretty radical in terms of protesting in the way that means the government simply cannot function until they gave us a fair voting system. Like I am genuinely working on the wording of a tweet along the lines of, wouldn't it be interesting if uh,
Preview. This won't be a preview. This will be out 2 weeks after you tweet it. But sorry, go ahead.
wouldn't it be interesting if like I might tweet this on November 5th this year.
Okay. Ah, yeah.
Would it be interesting if next year on November 5th, like hundreds of thousands of people simply went to Parliament and simply stayed there, blocking every single exit until they gave us a fair voting system? Wouldn't that be crazy?
Anyone read Alan Moore ever? Like, yeah. Like, that was a crazy movie.
Mm,
Crazy. I see what you mean.
mm,
Yeah. Um. So yeah. So basically, yeah, engagement. This is something I think about often, which is, uh, you're right. Like, if the system doesn't allow for change, and doesn't serve people, this is like where revolutions happen historically, right?
mm,
Uh, I I wonder whether, because I see stuff like the Just Stop Oil protests, and I don't think with activism, and I'd like to know if you disagree with this, that any publicity is good publicity. I sometimes do wonder if the Just Stop Oil protests are antithetical to their aim. Now, on the one hand, I'm asking you about them and I'm
mm,
using them as an example. So someone might say,
mm.
clearly we've won because
Yeah.
more people are talking about us.
Mm.
But I think you don't just need like public awareness, but you need public support. How do you stand on that? Do you?
Yeah. So there's a link here. Uh, when during the Brexit campaign, I was working with the big People's Vote organization, and they, especially because Alistair Campbell was a huge part of it, kept wanting to platform Tony Blair. And I kept saying, yes, that'll work really well with your base, the people that have always been behind Tony Blair, etc. But the people we need to convince at the time were people like people that were tempted by Nigel Farage, who hate immigration. And those people see Tony Blair as the guy who opened the door. It's also people like Jeremy Corbyn and people behind him who see Tony Blair as this centrist, neoliberal, whatever. And so the two main camps that you're trying to convince hate the person you're using to try and convince them.
Yeah, you got to think tactically.
It's
Yeah,
not smart politics.
yeah.
And so with Just Stop Oil, I do sometimes question if you allow for even the interpretation that you are targeting the public and not the politicians that can actually do something about the issues that you're campaigning on, you lose.
Yeah.
So I am 100% for radical actions by Just Stop Oil to severely disrupt the ordinary functioning of government for the purposes of combating climate change. But do not allow the narrative to be seen that you're getting in the way of working class people, because one of the biggest arguments that we're having on climate change is this perception that, oh, it's going to make our fuel more expensive, you're going to attack working class people, it's going to be bad for poverty if you tackle this issue. When no, we can make the rich pay for this transition, but if you allow the perception that Just Stop Oil doesn't care about the lives of working class people, then you lose the fight against climate change.
Yeah, you've lost in that way. So much of it's a PR game, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it strikes me it's so difficult. Where on Twitter, TikTok, you'll have 1,000 different takes of something within a few
Yep.
minutes. But yeah. But I guess that's also why getting Gen Z on side, who are the, say, perpetrators, probably the wrong word, the people pushing a lot of these narratives from the ground up, and the mainstream media, like, being a week behind a lot of the time. That's a reason to get them involved. If you could relay one piece of information that you think the UK public should be aware of, which they may not be, what would that be?
Ooh.
If you could just transmit something into, it could be a fact or whatever, into everyone's brain.
Uh, I haven't already said.
Oh, it could
Um,
be something you already said a minute.
well, I think the most important thing I wish people understood right now is that the UK is objectively not a democracy, because if the majority of votes always go to parties that are in a minority within Parliament, then the majority of votes have no effect on decision making at the government level. And right now, the party of government, its members have voted to create a fair voting system, but the person standing in the way of that, person standing in the way of you having a fair voting system, is Keir Starmer. And that has a real impact on your life, because if you look at things like the polls about what kind of society we want to be, the majority of the public, something in the high 60s, believe we should tax the rich more in order to help people who are struggling, working class people. But we keep handing power to a government that thinks the exact opposite, that is fundamentally against the idea of wealth redistribution. So because we don't have a fair voting system, you don't get a fair shot in life. And Keir Starmer has the power to change that and is currently refusing to. And so what you're going to end up with, unless we pressure him to your absolute maximum ability over the next few years, is that Keir Starmer might not do the things that we need to turn this country around, and then the Tories will be back in, or maybe even Nigel Farage, in 2029. And unless you pressure this issue about the voting system, we are all screwed.
Make them do the right thing, kind
Yeah.
of thing. Yeah. To someone who, so you said earlier that it's, in a way, it's harder to give up, and obviously that was in the context of receiving a lot of hate online. I think there are those out there. Gen Z is definitely involved in politics, but there are definitely those out there who, I think, despair and are disenfranchised, and we've just spoken about a number of reasons why there might be. Is it optimism they need? Is it sort of like a doggedness of like not giving up? Because you sort of said like, I'm in this regardless of sort of like what happens. Maybe asking like, what would you say to encourage them to get back involved is like the wrong way of phrasing it, but you know what I mean? Like, how would you click them back into gear of saying that the fight's not over?
So I'd say what got me involved and what took me from not being involved to being involved was that.
That's a much better phrasing of my question. Thank you. Yeah,
Sorry,
appreciate that. You're holding my hand through
sorry,
this. Thank you. No, don't apologize. Thank you. I'm like, damn, I should have phrased it that way. Thank you.
Was I previously believed that the politicians had it covered, that the people who were in the driving seat knew how to drive.
Yeah.
And therefore I, as somebody who wasn't an expert in this, didn't have the right to get involved and put my voice out there. The system didn't belong to me. I didn't have a right to input on it. But with Brexit specifically, because I knew that I knew better than the people in charge, I knew I had a right to get involved. And especially because Brexit supposedly won, I thought, well, maybe people are against me. With where politics is now, I think people feel that because politics has not gone their way, especially young people, it's not gone the way of young people for so long, we feel that the people in charge have a right to be in charge,
Yeah.
and that we don't have the right to really challenge them, and that there isn't that much hope because we're always going to lose, the right's always going to win, and even when they don't win, it'll be someone like Keir Starmer who won't do the things we need. I think the answer to that, and I was speaking to somebody, Gen Z, who came up to me in the gym a few months ago, and he was like, he was so distraught.
Like, bro, you look ripped. Sorry.
No,
But
actually,
after he said that, what
guy,
did he say?
that guy is genuinely so much worse than me. But it was the point that I made to him was like, if you look at every if you look at the general principle of people get more conservative as they get older, millennials and Gen Z are breaking that principle. Boomers, silent generation, and Gen X at the age of 35, they were 5 points less conservative than the national average. But by the time they reached the age of 70, they were 5 points more conservative. So that general trend of getting more conservative. However, millennials at the age of 35 are 15 points less conservative. And that's and so we've broken that trend because the concept of equality in the 90s and before was up for debate.
Yeah.
For the perspective of Gen Z and millennials, we don't see it as up for debate. Yeah. You either want equality or get off the pot. That's why the right often complains about cancel culture, because they're not used to the idea of just being pushed off the board.
It's consequence culture.
Exactly. And So the generations that are to come are going to be much more fiercely pro-equality, especially as we are the increasing demographic of both the voter base and the consumer base. So those with power, both politically and in terms of capitalism, they're going to realize that we are the market they have to cater to. And given that the majority of the country has always voted progressive, at least relatively progressive compared to the Tories, in every election since World War II, apart from three, especially if we got a fair voting system with, on top of that, the generational shift caused by millennials and Gen Z, the future is very, very bright.
Mm.
It is simply a question of when, not if.
Hmm. The
So
tides are moving that
the
way.
tides are
It's
moving
like,
that
yeah,
way.
yeah,
So my message to Gen Z especially is, if you want that future to come faster, get out, pressure your politicians, go out and protest, talk about it on social media, really get people engaged in capital P politics, because there are so many people that I see doing great work online, lots of Gen Zs, lots of millennials doing great work, but that work is being directed um at us.
Mm.
We're talking amongst ourselves, which is important,
Yeah.
which is super important, because we need to make sure that we don't allow people like Andrew Tate to infect us as a demographic. However, if we don't start directing that energy at the politicians, then they're going to keep doing the wrong stuff, and they're the ones who control the levers of power right now.
Mm.
So there is hope. You just need to get out and grab it.
Word. We sort of touched on this earlier. You've studied, obviously law and French, and you have spent numerous hours learning about politics, economics, and so you have that sort of like repository of knowledge. To someone who, let's say, they have, for lack of a better phrase, the BBC understanding of politics and economics.
Mm.
They've not studied anything like law formally at university, nor they haven't done like politics A level or anything like that. Uh, Maybe their For You page curates, some piece of content like yours or other creators who will talk about the damaging economic effects of certain pieces of policy and stuff like that. To someone like that who's intimidated by, say, like the big economic machine, are there any, no, it might sound trite, but like books, resources, creators, even websites that you'd suggest for them to go to like start getting a handle? Because I think even for me, and I've read a few books on economics, I'm so conscious of what I don't know and that it is a huge complex machine. I'm hesitant to make like large declarative statements. I mean, I'll get behind like Brexit was obviously a bad idea. Um, because I'm sort of like conscious of my ignorance. So yeah, if someone wanted to better educate themselves, is there a place that you suggest they start aside from your content, of course?
uh, I'd, s- I think that is an important question, because sorry to give the politician. That's such a good question.
No, no, no,
Uh,
it sounds like
um,
it's fine.
um, uh,
I'll take the compliment. I'm
but
good.
I my issue is that I struggle with that, because I wish I'd studied economics, and I
Yeah,
wish I knew exactly where to go to get a more detailed understanding of economics.
because I guess the thing I always think of when people ask me about philosophy, I think I mean, Stanford and other universities literally put out free courses online. Like you can
mm,
watch
mm.
24 lectures from an undergraduate course for free. And so I always go, well, if you want literal academic philosophy, it's a Google search away.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
um,
Well, I mean that's one thing. The issue with Google search is, it's often you get the confirmation bias,
yeah,
and it's, yeah, it's difficult. I think you've got to try and find people that you know have studied economics,
yeah,
find people that are talking about these issues, and also see if you can find out what their value system is.
yeah,
Like one of the reasons why I make sure that what I talk about isn't just Brexit, isn't just politics, and you'll see little bits of my actual personality. You'll see that I like Buffy. You'll see that I play Fortnite. You see little bits of my actual personal life in the content that I put out,
yeah.
because people don't trust agendas; they trust
People.
people,
Mm,
um, and I want people to know what my actual values are,
mm,
so that they know, all right, he's talking about this from a very logical academic standpoint, but his objective with convincing me in this direction is that he wants equality, he wants this or that. I think you need to find economists that know the stuff,
mhm.
and also talk from a perspective that means you know what their objective is.
Yeah.
Now they might not be right. They might have made some mistakes in the economics.
Experts make mistake all the time. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
But if you at least know that they're an option of somebody you could listen to, and then broaden it out and find more people.
Yeah. Kyla Scanlon's a creator I know who, I mean, her economics content is more US focused, but she's brilliant at sort of like contextualizing stuff. That's someone who comes to mind. But yeah, no, fair.
This is one of the things we need. We need a people, an organization that can actually make sure that people like us get on TV.
I personally think I should be on TV all the time. Yeah. I applied to Love Island. No, I didn't. I promise. Although that would be hilarious though if we flooded reality TV shows with sort of like political activists and like, you know,
Oh
just
my
like
god!
really attractive people being like, "Hey, so have you thought about the equality gap, the wage gap? I think that's really important, babe."
Right.
Like, I just like that would be the best bit. I would watch that show.
Yeah, 100%. I mean that's the thing we're talking about with the Andrew Tate. The people that operate in that space, they tend to be dicks.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, how about this? We get Activist Island, and we get like a mixture of right wing and left wing activists, and we put them all together, and we just get the most intense debates. I think that's I mean that'd be interesting.
I would watch that.
Yeah, and like the prizes are like you get 5 Wikipedia searches to like fact check stuff, like, you know, because like obviously they all go and it's all just like, you know, anecdotes. So it's like, okay, and maybe like the end of the challenge is like, and wealth is down after all this sort of stuff. Okay, I got to tell you this, and I would not cut this out, but I'm happy for this to be on record. I have done edibles, right? And I have this. There's the same edible story to everyone who's done them, which is you take the edible, 3-4 hours pass and you feel nothing. You take more of the edible, it all hits you, right?
Yep.
Don't do it. When you take the edible, whatever's dose you take, just don't fucking take more. I don't care how sober you feel. I don't care if a day has passed. Don't fucking ingest more, okay? My edible story, my friend absolutely, he played me like a fiddle. This is a guy I know who I drank under the table a couple of times in uni. He was like an improv comedy friend. And I went out to see him in New York and he said, "Oh, you've nearly killed me twice with tequila. I need to get you stoned." And I was like, fair enough. And so he gave me a gummy edible and he said, "This is half of a gummy." He said, "This is enough to get me pretty baked." And he's about the same height and weight as me.
Yeah.
We sometimes get confused for like brothers when we're out there. So I took it and I was empty stomach for like 12 hours off the flight. Had slept a little bit one night. So I'm like, this is going to hit me quick. We're walking around Brooklyn, nothing for 4 hours. And then
4 hours.
for like 4 hours, nothing. But then he says, this is how he gets me. He says, and I'm like, I'm still not feeling anything, dude. He goes, "Oh, well, maybe I just gave you a placebo to fuck with you." And he's while holding a whole one. And I'm like, okay. So I take another one. So I've taken 3 times the dose because I'm stupid. And then he leaves me in a park with a woman I was trying to flirt with. And then it all hits me at once and I suddenly lose all continuity. And the only way I can communicate is through looking at my phone and messaging him. Like I've lost the ability to speak to her. So I'm messaging him. I'm like, "Rick," this is his name, "Rick." It's all happening. And he's like, "Where are you?" And I'm like, "I'm by the tree." But like, I don't know where I
Oh my god.
So don't be me. I honestly, I've never, like, in the hours after sobering up from that experience, I was the most profoundly anti-drug person. Like, I would have been behind Reagan. I was like, drugs are abominable. They should be illegal. Everyone who uses them should be arrested. Obviously, I cooled off and I've like taken other drugs since. But yeah, just I don't want you to go through that fate because I was. When he eventually found me, I just like lay on his bed hallucinating for like a few hours. It just wasn't good. So
Wow.
yeah, anyway.
Thing is, I do want to do edibles at some point, and I am tempted.
Yeah.
Even despite hearing what you just
Okay,
did.
yeah. Look, I mean, did I benefit? I mean, it's a funny in retrospect. I think I've not heard of really bad edible trips other than just being like, "Oh, that was unpleasant," as opposed to psychedelic bad trips where it seems like people can genuinely be haunted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you've already thought through this because you're a very logical person. But for me, the sort of clinching argument. I have a friend who's very pro psychedelics, and I've known him for about 10 years. He's one of my closest friends, and he always said, "You know, have you ever drunk alcohol?" And I was like, "Yeah." He said, "That is a more dangerous drug than most of the drugs I do."
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, "Yeah."
No, like I guess I've always said that I would try weed before I did alcohol, and that literally happened.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Legit.
At uni, at school, I would just see the worst versions of my friends when they got drunk. From a psychological standpoint, Freud, ego, id, superego, get rid of the superego, crap person.
Yeah.
And also just from a perspective of like, my reason for not drinking is I have a very addictive personality. If I like something, I want it all the time. So I would be horrendous drunk.
Yeah.
I also have so many demons from childhood trauma that emotional regulation is. I don't trust drunk Femi. He's never come out, but I don't trust who he would be. There's also the issue of I don't like the fact that we don't seem to, especially at uni age, be able to have fun without it. And like the highlight of our week would be
Get wasted.
yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, and
It's
it,
so fun being drunk.
and I'm not speaking as like an old fogey, because I had this opinion when I was 18.
Yeah.
Like if we're going to a club every week and the moment you sober up, you want to go home, that means you objectively don't like the environment, but you've chemically altered your own brain to make you think you like the place.
Yeah, you need to be drunk having a good time. Yeah, yeah.
And for me, that just, it didn't make any sense to me. I want my interactions to be based on my time with the people around me and the music. I don't want it to be
It's only good if I'm off my face.
yeah.
Anyway, back on track.
Wait, where did we go?
The country's terrible. What's going on? Meanwhile, on our acid trip, what if all the votes mattered the same? Just hear me out. Just hear me out on this. What if your vote, my vote, counted the same as your vote? Wouldn't that be wild? I might be tripping right now. Like, okay. Anyway, how can people support you? What's the
I guess the main way is follow me on YouTube. That's the main way I'm making.
You've got a Patreon as well?
I've got the Patreon,
I'll,
yes.
I'll link that.
But so the Patreon, like I've always felt funny about Patreon because it's a place where I don't actually put out any content. It's just for people who support me to support me.
But I think that can be, as long as you're open about that's what it is. I don't think it has to
Yeah,
be exchanged.
I'm open about that. It's just I'm aware that given the demographic I'm primarily trying to speak to is millennials and Gen Z, we don't have any money.
Yeah.
So I would rather they just subscribe to my YouTube, and then Google can pay me instead.
Yeah, no, fair, legit. Yeah. Anything else you want to mention? Anyone listeners? We covered like something you'd want to tell every person in the country, or like how to remain optimistic and all that. Anything else that you wish people would know, or about you or your mission or anything, or your favorite superhero? I don't know.
Yes, mainly I want you to know that Buffy the Vampire Slayer is the greatest show of all time.
All right,
And
you
there
had
is no argument to be had against it. It is the most empathetic characters that exist. It is the best for life lessons. And if you haven't watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer as an adult, so all you millennials that say, "Oh, I saw it as a kid," yeah, you don't understand the show if you haven't watched it as an adult. That's what I want you to know. That's the main takeaway from this entire podcast.
Thank you so much for tuning in. For more hard-hitting takes. But no, in all seriousness, thank you for what you do. Your content really inspires me and it keeps me informed. And thank you. So I'm a big fan. Cheers. Legit. Cool. Give me 1 second. I don't know why. This is on low battery. I'm just going to change it out. Everything else right. This will be a seamless transition for the edit.